Hey, welcome back, Liches. What is your Dungeon Master not telling you about your player backstory? We realized in one of our most recent videos how strongly opinionated people are about using player backstories or not.
Was it a touchy subject?
Very much. We had a lot of feedback. Some Dungeon Masters will ask their players for backstories, and some don't. And then some just don't care if you do or you don't. And that's okay. That's just the style of play that different Dungeon Masters, different tables have. The Dungeon Masters that do ask for backstories ask for them because they want some kind of player investment, and they also want to know where this character came from before they started becoming an adventurer. They might want to reference the character's background every now and again just to keep plucking the string, keeping them a little spark of inspiration every now and again. Your Dungeon Master might tell you, don't give me backstories. Your backstory is told in the first few levels. We're all gonna work on your backstories together as you figure out how you're adventuring. Most Dungeon Masters are not gonna tell you that your backstory absolutely sucks. I mean, they want you to be inspired and they want you to play in their game. They just may not incorporate some of the things that you have come up with, and that's all right. They're still gonna make a riveting and gripping story for you if that's what you want, if that's the type of table that you're at.
This stuff all comes down to Dungeon Master choice, Dungeon Master play style. Some DMs hate having their players all be chosen ones, where they're the Luke Skywalker or the Neo, and somehow their backstories are perfectly intertwined into the big bad evil guy's machinations and plots.
It was all fate, and they each had a piece and a hand in that fate.
Some Dungeon Masters hate this. Hate it, and that's okay. It's a play style preference. A common perception is that 5th edition is a game for heroic fantasy as a baseline. Some people call it like the critical role play style, where they have these really deep backstories, and there's massive payoffs, and there's big twists and turns and plot twists and tears and emotions.
The truth is that Critical Role really sparked those people into playing.
Sure.
Honestly. Maybe those people didn't know that that's how you could play Dungeons and Dragons, and all of a sudden they were like, oh, hey, cool. Like, I can throw in my love for playing video games and my love for acting at the same time. Go figure.
And there is nothing wrong with that. And there's also nothing saying that your game has to be like that.
Only one way to play. There's no.
Definitely not. It's your table, your rules. If you don't want to have that kind of campaign where the backstories are going to be super deep into what's happening with the big bad guy and all that other stuff, then don't have it. Just have backstories be things you sort of use here and there, or ignore them completely. Let's get one thing clear. There is absolutely nothing that says that a Dungeon Master has to incorporate your character's backstory into the campaign. There is nothing in the player's handbook or the Dungeon Master's guide that offers even any advice on doing this, as far as I know. When your Dungeon Master decides to take and pull something out of your backstory and insert it into the campaign, this is not an obligation that they have to do. Consider it more like a perk to try to make the campaign a little bit cooler, a little bit personal for your experience at the table. So don't take it personally when the Dungeon Master can't figure out a way to jam your backstory into the campaign or what is currently going on in the session. It's not a dig against you. It's not a slight against your backstory. Sometimes it's easier to just avoid it than try to shoehorn it in, and you're trying to smash a square peg through a round hole.
I get it. When players approach you with this massive backstory, you can just be overwhelmed and roll your eyes and say, hey, too long didn't read, right? I mean, it's a lot. Personally, I love creative writing, so I read them even if they're super long. I'm interested. For those who aren't interested, hey, they don't have to use backstories. If a player creates something and approaches you with it, they are so souped to jump into your campaign. That much is given. Like, they're ready to play and they have the drive, right? They're ready to jump in. Do not tell that player that you're gonna ignore their backstory. Even if you are going to, please don't tell them to their face, I'm not gonna use anything, so everything you wrote is pretty much just BS, and I'm not gonna use it. Smile, nod, say, hey, that was really cool.
Instead of ignoring those 8 pages that this person took the time in their free time to create, go through it, read it, explain to them, hey, there's a lot here. Chances are I'm not going to be able to get through like even 3/4 of this, but what you wrote on page 3 and on 6 was amazing. Those 2 things, expand on them a little bit, and that's what we'll focus on for your character. You have a person that is showing all kinds of enthusiasm for your game. You do not want to crush that. That is such a rare thing to find. It's like a new player thing. It's like they're bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. They're just grabbing onto your lore and everything, and they just want to be a part of the world. And here you come, big bad DM.
None of this matters.
You know what you are? You're nobody. Prove to me you're somebody in this world. I'm Clint goddamn Eastwood. One take, bitches, let's go.
If you're into backstories and you're working on backstories, communication is key. So in what you were talking about, if it's super long, you want to focus on one thing, communicate about what that is. Moving on into communication, the Dungeon Master also wants to tell the players what kind of setting they're in, what kind of world they're in, so they can properly build in it.
Dungeon Masters, don't pull the old switcheroo. Don't be like, hey, we're starting in Waterdeep, but we're really going to the Underdark, mother bleepers.
Psych! There's a common misconception that players want backstories because they want to tell the story of how they were big damn heroes before they became adventurers. And that's not always the case. They can still have a backstory, however short or long, that just tells what they were, what their occupation was before they started becoming an adventurer as well.
Who their family was, who their friends were, acquaintances, contacts, how they trained to become a wizard. Simple stuff.
And we feel like most of the classes deserve some kind of explanation of how they became a wizard, especially. How they became a sorcerer is kind of easy. That doesn't really need, you can be nobody from a sorcerer. You were just kind of, you popped out with natural abilities. But a fighter, man, you had to train and you had to be good, right? A paladin, you had to follow your oath to a T. I mean, these are not small feats. So there's still story there. There's still some kind of meat in the beginning that you've got to latch onto. What if your Dungeon Master has the entire party start at level 10? Or maybe you have a new player that's jumping into an existing party that has been playing up until level 10. Those players need backstories to tell what exactly their adventure was beforehand. Like, they're level 10, they are some damn heroes then. Don't forget to subscribe for more Lichen content weekly. Toll the Dead for notifications.
Please like this video and drop us a comment. Let us know how you're using backstories in your games. You want to know something else that your Dungeon Master isn't going to tell you, honestly, truthfully? They're not going to tell you exactly how much or how little backstory they expect you to write.
Yeah.
They're not going to be like, oh, page is good, index card's good. You're going to ask and they're going to say, sure. Or they're going to be like, yeah, it doesn't need to be that long. Or maybe a little longer. That's if you're lucky. That's if you're lucky. Most Dungeon Masters are not going to do any of that. They're just going to say, meh, do what you want. Whatever you're comfortable with. I'll make it work. Because Dungeon Masters are so excited to just play, and like it's like baiting a fish and you're trying to hook and you're just like, oh goddamn, I'm gonna lose them. I'm gonna lose them.
That's really kind of our play style though too. Like, we don't really care if you give us a backstory or not. We love it if you do. Not such a big deal if you don't. And it's hard for us to tell you how much to make.
If you're trying to come up with a backstory, you've got your player's handbook open and you're looking for inspiration, you got 2 sources that you can pull from. The character backgrounds and the character classes. And we think that the character classes are going to add so much more weight to your backstory by like a long shot.
Especially if you're playing in a high magic campaign, because that probably made the most impact on your early life. If you're playing in a low magic campaign, aim towards building your backstory around the background, because it was more about your occupation.
Exactly. But those character classes, like your Druidic Circle, is going to tell the Dungeon Master and the other players a lot about who you are. Like if you're Circle of the Moon and you're constantly shape-shifting into bears and other creatures all the time, that's like your jam, there's got to be a reason why your Circle does that.
Why?
Because doggy style's better when you're a dog.
Oh, okay.
Where you learned how to become a wizard, how you had a pact with your warlock patron, your cleric having a religion and a god that you have to worship and trying to get followers. These are all things that are just going to happen naturally, and just sort of explaining how that happened is going to make the dungeon master dive into your backstory a little bit. You have mentors, you have rivals perhaps. The character classes and sort of figuring out that little bit of history, that's how you come up with a very usable backstory that your dungeon master is going to be reading over a good old goblet of wine and eating some stinky cheese and be like, yes, appease me more with your choices. I want to get real with you guys for a moment and let you in on one of my dungeon mastering flaws. If someone comes to the table and they have the tropiest of tropes as their backstories, it's uber tragic. My daddy's gone. My mama didn't love me. All that. I don't know what to do with it. It's so goddamn basic, and I've seen it 1,000 times, and you're going to expect it to play out. It's just like, oh, I want revenge on the guy that killed my mom and dad. Well, guess what? What am I supposed to do? Make the Joker not really the killer of your dad, Batman? He was secretly part of this thing where your parents were part of a death cult and the Joker had to murder both of them. Like, I have to start pulling random crazy shit out of nowhere just to make this stuff work. And I already got a tough enough time because you guys wouldn't buy into my plot hooks. I can't do it anymore.
Honestly, if I'm put in that situation, if they're giving me a basic backstory, I'm just gonna hand them a basic finish. It's gonna be quick and easy, and it's what they're expecting, so just give it to them. And done. You want to surprise, and you want to twist, and you want to shock the players, and I know that, but man, just give it back to them what they gave you. There's no shame in that either.
I suppose you're right.
I think my fault is that I enjoy the creative writing process, and I tend to shine the spotlight maybe too brightly on one backstory to the point where, oh man, that's where I want to take my campaign. And I've been careful to not shine too brightly there, not to focus too strongly on one player, because it makes everyone else feel lesser. My biggest pet peeve is if they've written something, it's a page long, and they've opened and closed their story, they shoved it into a hole and poured cement over it so I couldn't touch it. It's like the story began and is completed, and there's no way I could ever contact any of their family or notify loved ones. That feels like to me like they gave me the effort and they tried to give me something, but then immediately retconned and made sure I couldn't disturb any of it.
Yeah, they're terrified you're gonna kill some of their family, kidnap their sister.
It's worse than having nothing. What's your pet peeve?
If you're a player at my table, don't write your backstory and try to make yourself the main character of my campaigns. Yeah. If I have given you a little bit of what's going on, it's like, the evil Lord Skeletor has taken over the realm, and he is about to make everyone's lives a living hell. I don't want your backstory to be like, my dad and evil Lord Skeletor went to high school together, and he was known as Uncle Skelly to me, and I need to find out what happened to him. Like, don't insert yourself that much into the background, whereas everyone else is like, yeah, it's his, we're just gonna play out his story because it makes the most sense, because that guy's destroying the realm.
Something we think about as Dungeon Masters is that we really wish our players would focus more on other player connections rather than their personal backstories. It almost gives a larger, more incorporating reason for them to start adventuring, and gives them a connection to the table, really embraces that camaraderie, makes both players feel good.
Yeah.
They have some kind of like brother-sister connection, came from the same family, they were cousins or whatever, mm-hmm. They fought in battle together, they have stories, and they have previous past. They know all the same inside jokes. It's a great way to bring in a new player. Focus on that is way more beneficial than having a huge backstory that we don't know how to use sometimes.
Exactly. If you don't feel like coming up with a big backstory, just talk to the other players and be like, what are you playing? Hey, can I be like your best friend? Or can I be the person that trained you how to be a fighter? Something as simple as that. You immediately create bonds, and you are going to feel like brothers or sisters in arms the minute you step out onto that battlefield together, or the minute you start going on an adventure. If you take nothing else away from this video, what Kamo just said is absolute gold.
And also, I really like some kind of statement about what your damage is. What happened to you? I'm really talking about some kind of story hook, something we can use later down the line that might turn into a side quest. I love doing those things. It makes players feel special, and I can do it individually across the table. They love to go down someone else's player backstory and then come back to the main story, and then we do it for another player, and it's really cool for them, and it's really cool for the other players to join. That's just the style of play that I love doing. So that is one piece, maybe even one sentence, part of a backstory that we could use. Also, we love to use backstories as we're questing. We might come across an open field and the DM calls out on one of the players, Sarah Connor. As you cross this open field, you realize that this is the place where your father fought and died. And just to have that little pull from the backstory just makes them feel super special. They can have a moment there that the party shares, and then they can just move on.
It does not have to be a grand, epic, massive thing. It can just be 25-second moment in a session.
It was just a beat. It was part of her backstory. It didn't make her some big damn epic superhero. Well, that's all we have for you today, Liches. Remember, the key in having a backstory or not having a backstory is communicating with your Dungeon Master.
We have another video right here on character backstories, but don't click on it. Don't click on it. It's terrible. It's old, we're out of focus, it's got bad lighting. Don't do it.
Bye, Liches.
Bye.